nachos, amigos, and welcome to Record Breakers, a podcast where a bunch of friends hang out and share albums with each other, an album at a time. It's like a little book club for music. It's a fun time had by all. I forgot to change the thing. All right, I'll change it now. That being said, here I have my crew, my team, my squad. We've got the same old gang. We've got Bret.
I've got a dryer sheet and a capo. Don't fuck with me.
We've got Drew.
Hey.
And we've got David. We're here to talk about music. We're talking about an album. The provider of the album is David, DJing him. Deej, what have you brought to us this week?
PD Rave, I bought an album from a group that I'd never actually listened to before in my life. I'd only had a passing knowledge of them and what they were about. And that is the 2015 album What Should Not Be Unearthed by South Carolina-based technical death metal band Nile.
Mm-hmm.
Technically.
So let's see. Let's see if it should have been unearthed or not. Bret, what were your expectations coming into this album?
Well, I am not somebody who listens to this kind of music. I was unfamiliar with the band by name. I was expecting from the title that we were going to get a dose of Lovecraftian horror, but or maybe the Balrog. I don't know. Maybe I don't think there was a Balrog song. I'll talk about that later.
Yes. Drew, what were your expectations coming into this album?
Well, I knew it was coming from the DJM, so I knew that no matter what type of metal we were getting, there was probably going to be some crazy licks being played, because that's usually his modus operandi when it comes to this stuff. Other than that, I wasn't sure what I was getting. Looking at the titles of the songs, I figured the black/death metal on Google Music was maybe not all 100% correct. Mostly in the first part of that. And getting some stuff, like Bret said, about maybe a little bit of a weird horror stuff, maybe some mythology, Egyptian stuff. But
what Egypt? Where would you get that hint from?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe like the 5 gods are just in titles. Yes.
Or their name being a river, what cuts through?
River runs
that that doesn't necessarily tell me mythology.
I think Bret was in. Bret, I think Drew was in.
No.
Yeah.
No.
No.
Too
God
late.
damn it, Barb.
I blew it. Nope.
Even if you would have. Yeah, that's fine. We all get do-overs.
But somebody call Matthew. Yes. I will say I had no idea what to expect. Well, I kind of had an idea, maybe a little bit, but not totally. I will say this. I will say this before, and I will pose this question: If we have Weeaboo, and then we also have for K-pop and Korean culture we have Koreaboo, and for British culture Teaboo. What would be the equivalent for Egyptian culture? Spiraboo?
I'm gonna say
Sphinxaboo?
Pharaohphilia.
Pharaohboo?
Pharaohphilia.
Philia is not the word we're going for here.
Either way, let's talk about the music.
Sarcophagan.
Yes.
Sarcophamery.
But yeah, Deej, how would you describe this album musically? What would be the themes, elements that you would bring up?
Truthfully, again, I jumped into this completely blind. I only knew of Nile in passing. I knew what they were about, more or less. I knew that they were a little more complex than your standard American brutal death metal band. There are some 16ths, there are some 64ths sprawled throughout this, if you will. And yes, in case you hadn't caught on, Nile, their motif is ancient Egypt, but with all of the elements that make death metal brutal and dark and twisted. Rather than walking like an Egyptian, like that video and songs from the 80s, this is definitely about war, death, and the atrocities of humankind. You know, kind of keeping with the theme of the last few albums we've done here on the Record Breakers: war, death, the atrocities of humankind, dark
pretty young
creatures rising from the earth.
Yeah.
Kind of keeping in theme with the last few albums we've done.
Yes.
Tenderonis.
Bret, how would you describe this album musically? What would be the theme?
Musically? Well, let's start with the vocals. Perhaps, maybe. Freddie Mercury. This ain't. The vocals are barely intelligible. So if you're looking for like some deep lyrical content, you're going to be having to find them liner notes. It is the opinion of one Brett Hibbard that if you're going more for vocal aesthetic than actually being intelligible, you have chosen to make your lyrical content only known to those willing to do their homework and prioritizing it less than the instrumentation. But in this style of music, I tend to just look at like the vocals as another percussion instrument and then understand that I'm not ever going to get it. I can't use the excuse that I'm old or too old for this because all of these songs were written by a guy in his 50s. So, yeah. It's got that double bass drum that it's there. You can't, like, when it's not there is when you notice. There's some thick as molasses guitar tone, very technical soloing. I did find the bass kind of hard to figure out. Like I couldn't really find it. There's a lot of things going on in the thump zone, especially seeing that these guitars were tuned to drop A tuning. There's some Lovecraftian horror influences, some Egyptian themes, and as the guy who brought Power Slave, I'm cool with that. But this is a very difficult album to listen to and pick things out, which I will break down when we get into tracks.
Mm-hmm. Drew, how would you describe this album musically?
Well, like Bret said, the vocals were not something that on first pass you're going to catch right off unless you're in this milieu all the time. That being said, I was able to catch some because I used to be.
Putting the ooh in the milieu. Yeah, sorry.
Milieu, yes. Using my fancy $5 words. No, but that being said, this is when I tend towards the heavier music, and you're going to make it less like intelligible and less pretty, and it's less like power metal-y, like Scream to the Hill sort of stuff. This is where I tend to fall more. The like deeper guttural sort of scream is more of what I like. So that I was able to get down with. I don't like when it's the high pitched, like very like nasally scream almost, if that makes sense.
Getting on my phone, calling R. Halford. There's this guy in the Cleveland area that needs a visit from his turbo lover.
I wouldn't call. You know what I'm talking about, and it's not. But the lyrics here and there, like Bret said, do dip into the Egyptian and also the horror, and I just dropped something. Bounces in between that. I'm Italian. I talk with my hands. I should get things out of my way. But the instrumentation itself is heavy as fuck. Like Bret said, it is a drop A tuning, and the guitars hit very, very hard. The bass is there, but the guitar work is great to me. There are parts in here where there's the juxtaposition of it'll go from like the chugging super heavy guitar riff and then like just real pretty sweeps like in the background and then straight back in, and that I kind of dig. It was carried mostly, I think the music was really carried more by the guitar in my opinion. The drumming is solid, the drumming is tight, don't get me wrong. But it's something that it was mostly blast beats. It was mostly like, we're going to ride this kick and this snare and like a hi-hat, and we're just going to go and we're going to machine gun it. And like, if you're looking for like crazy fills, this probably isn't for you. That being said, the drumming for what it was trying to do achieved every goal. It was very, very tight. The guy is a drum teacher, so I would assume he knows what he's doing. And it sort of showed here. It wasn't like it was going for anything crazy or new. This isn't some Buddy Rich insanity. This is just like, no, we're just going to drum real
Buddy
fast.
Rich, the newest drummer in the world, Buddy Rich. You know that.
Did I say new?
He's not trying anything new. This is not a Buddy Rich. Just I'm just trying.
Fair enough.
All those kids are trying. Playing.
Have you heard that new Bo Diddley sound, kids?
Thunka, 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 thunka. Da-da-da. Yeah, that's what the kids are playing these days. Is that Buddy Rich shit? Yeah. Sorry.
Kids should be playing that Buddy Rich shit. But point being, it's something that sort of fell into that in places. It worked for what it was, but it wasn't what brought you.
What did bring you, Drew? What did bring you?
What brought me through this was the guitar work.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Let's talk about some of the key tracks. Because this is a lot. There's the guitar work and like the crazy death metal screaming is fascinating. But let's talk about some of the key tracks. Deej, David, what would be some of the key tracks for you?
Well, truthfully, if you're someone like me who loves the opportunity to get into the mind of these rock and metal dudes that go way, way out of their way to write some really strange and bizarre and interesting lyrics, I would say this entire album with a tab of genius.com is well worth your time. However, in particular, the two songs for me, the first one was In the Name of Amun. Again, the lyrics of this song were really fascinating. The whole album told these crazy stories, and somewhere in the Name of Amun, there were some groovy death metal bits that were kind of fun. There's some headbanging here and there in between just the straight up brutality, which can be appreciated. Also, Age of Famine. Those were the two that really, really stood out to me. But just generally, if you are someone who can appreciate rock and metal dudes writing some weird, wacky lyrics that aren't just about shaking your butt and having a good time, this entire album is what it's all about.
I'm all about shaking my butt.
Yeah, don't yuck anyone's yum now. Like, come on now.
Bret, what would be some of the key tracks for you?
Well, I'm going to be completely honest. I had this album on repeat for hours, and I struggled to find a lot of things to stand out that were describable in a way that differentiated them from another track. There's a lot of sameness on this album, but I did my best. Call to Destruction, the opener on this album, is like, it has 500,000 plays on Spotify. I'm using my go-to thing. I'm looking at where the plays are, and like the rest of the album stands around 100,000 a play. So this is by far the most played song. You literally get everything you are going to find on this album, except for a few things in the first few minutes. Evil to cast out evil. Around the 3-minute mark, it becomes a thrash metal band, and there are solos that spoke more to the things that I am familiar with, and it like stood out because it sounded so different from the rest of the album. Also, Ushabti Reanimator. Yes, my there's a strange minute and a half in the back half of this album that sort of breaks it up from like, you're like, oh my god, I'm like I've heard nothing but a bunch of double bass going on forever, and this shows up, which it definitely
nice
give it that minute, give it a minute and a half of like, this is some very much there's like a clean tone in this album. There is a place where there is not 2 sticks and 2 feet going at the same time. So yeah, like there's a lot going on here, but a lot of it is the double bass drum and like some open position gurgle rock.
Drew, what would be some of the key tracks for you?
Pretty
You
young.
led this album with a track called Call to Destruction. If the track doesn't come in fucking brutal, you've done it wrong. Well, it came in with blast beats and a guitar that never stopped moving and a kick drum that felt almost robotic at times. I think they're able to ring up destruction whenever they damn well please. In the name of Amun, the guitar lick, the sweep, just fits so incredibly well with that crunching rhythm. I think it's just great. But then the Ushapti, if I'm pronouncing that right, probably not.
That's how I screwed it up.
Like, Ushapti Reanimator. I want this song to be more than 1:30. I want it to have like lyrics. I want it to keep going because there was like, I want that to like morph into like crunchy death metal eventually. Like I want that theme to keep going into like a heavy metal song, and then it didn't. But it was really good, and I wanted more.
Yeah.
Need like a skit in the middle of this.
Yes.
Like maybe a comedy routine.
Prank call.
Yeah, cover. Like a bonus
Cover of
track.
Walk Like an Egyptian.
Yeah, cover. Yeah,
Yes.
cover track and in the very back, the hidden track.
Yes. I want to give a shout out to Walk Forth from Flames Unscathed. There's an entire
These song titles. These song titles. I love them and I hate them.
if you look at genius.com, there's an entire like set of bars, death metal bars, that wait, I'm gonna sneeze. Oh no.
I've been to a death metal bar.
Yes. I've been to a death metal pizza place. Hoax death metal pizza. Tight. From the
Wow,
7 who
throwing
work
shade.
slaughter, down to tear not with your teeth the flesh from my bones, is all lies on genius.com. I want that entire section to replace with what is actually being said, which is grr, 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 grr. Because I said there is no, I refuse to acknowledge that he ever says any of those words that are written down there in that particular stretch of song. I sat there because the thing where people, where ghost catchers, and they say like, oh, there's a ghost that says this thing, and they put it on the
Backward
screen.
tracking. Yeah.
Or like,
I'm hearing Satan speak backwards. Yeah.
Or like, when you say it and it confirms it because you're reading it, confirms what you're hearing. I tried to do that to myself hearing this, and I couldn't do it. When they're supposedly actually saying that.
Yep.
We will revisit that shortly.
Yes. That being said, let's bring it back around the horn.
Brack around the horn. Hey everybody.
Hey everybody. This is the Brack.
everybody.
Everybody. I like beans.
I love beans. How about you?
That album is coming. Trust me.
Oh man,
Yes.
I
Space
haven't listened to
Ghost.
that album in years.
Cartoon Planet. Cartoon
I
Planet.
have that somewhere.
I remember, and it's all about remembering the distinction between Space Ghost Coast to Coast and Cartoon Planet.
True.
Yep.
Because it was different. They were different shows.
Yes.
That being said, let's bring it back around the horn. Talk about some conclusive thoughts. Brett, what would be your conclusion on this album as a whole?
Well, no, sir. I didn't like it, but that doesn't mean there's not some very amazing technical work going on here. Again, I'm not here to yuck anyone's yums. Like, so if you enjoy this, it's 100% fine. It's not my thing. Nobody ever thought it would be. But you know, now I know, and knowing is half the battle. It didn't hurt. It was okay. It wasn't offensive. It wasn't the worst thing we've ever listened to. But you know, maybe next time.
Also, that band actually released another album, and
Wow.
I'm anxious to maybe make swag come back and talk about it.
Yeah. Then we'll lose this episode too.
Yes. Just for fun.
Swagger, you have to come back as a guest. Oh, by the way.
Yeah.
Hey. Oh, by the way.
It's the band I
We're
said
gonna-
sounded worse than a fart blown through a tuba.
Yes.
So yeah.
That'll be fun. But yeah, Drew, what will be your conclusive thoughts on this album as a whole?
It's something that I haven't listened to this style of music for a long time. The vocals itself are literally at this point what turned me off of it. Everything else I think is pretty damn cool. But something about those type of vocals just don't do it for me anymore. That being said, it was all right. It wasn't like, let me burp away from the microphone. It wasn't like I hated listening to it. It wasn't like I was dreading every time I put it on. It was just one of those things where, all right, this is the thing I'm doing. Again, the musicianship was pretty solid for what it was. The guitar work was great, but everything else was tight and well done. Just not like it didn't stand out. The guitar work did. So it was something that I'm glad it's around and I'm glad it's there. It's just never anything that I would put on the regular.
Yeah. This is some death metal ass death metal. Through and through.
From the American South.
Yes.
That's about Egypt.
And it's about Egypt. And if you're into that thing, you'll be into this. If you're not, this isn't going to change your mind. But if you're into it, this is going to be an exemplary example of it. Because there's a lot of nice things going on. It's very well made. It's very well done. There's a lot of interesting, like techniques and fun, creative things going on through it. But it's still that thing. It's still a genre of music that isn't necessarily one that I turn to for fun and for good jams. Or even necessarily one I turn to for breaking stuff music. I mostly like punk for that.
It's all about the he said, she said. No.
But go check it out, especially if you like death metal. And I'm glad there are still bands championing that genre.
Middle-aged people making this music. That's noteworthy.
Yes. That's that. Last but not least, Deej, what would be your conclusive thoughts on this album as a whole?
I am slightly disappointed that I did not enjoy this as much as I'd hoped. I appreciate the ugliness and unrelenting lack of regard for being welcoming that comes with the death metal genre. I appreciate that. What I do not appreciate is when your guitars and your drums are good and sound good, but they don't really have the low end that it should. Metal bands, please work on getting your bass better in your mix, please. Especially the death metal bands. I know that death metal bands have a certain level of ugliness and almost unintelligible, unlistenable quality to what they do. And again, I appreciate that to a certain extent. I love Nile's aesthetic. Love, 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 love Nile's aesthetic. If Nile were a band with a traditional metal singer, male, female, or whatever, I would love them what they are. However, with the brutal death metal vocals, it does take away from the stories that they're telling, which are, in my opinion, really, really cool. And this album could have been mixed better, and it could have been a bit more fun if it was a little more intelligible. Because there are growling vocalists that are intelligible and can be good. Maybe not here.
DMX.
So,
Yes.
I wish I enjoyed this more than I did.
Yeah, I think that's the sentiment. But let's get down to the main event of the evening now. We get to our haiku reviews, where we sum it all up in poetic form. Really fun times. Really good times. Let's get down to it. Let's get down to the nitty gritty. Haiku numero uno. Bret, what is your haiku?
All right. Grunt, 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 growl. Growl, grunt, growl, growl, grunt, growl, growl. Better than Cars 2.
Yes. Yes. Drew, what is your haiku?
Insane and brutal. The vocals are not from me. The talent's there.
My haiku. Yep, it's death metal. There are cool things to find here. It's still death metal. Deej, what is your haiku?
It's unrelenting, high-level brutality, not for novices.
That is.
It's for the core gamer.
It's for the
You gotta get
hardcore
good.
Get good, scrub. Yeah, those are our thoughts on Nile's What Should Not Be Unearthed. You can of course find it on our Spotify playlist. Play Record Breakers, the home game. Follow along at home. Do your due diligence and your due diligence.
Immediately after Chromeo, I recommend.
Fantastic. It's just a nice like contrast. It's a beautiful thing.
There was no saxophone on this album, and we broke our saxophone record.
Yes, but we're gonna get back down to that, I think, and maybe add a little accordion. To spoil our next pick, but which is gonna be by Bret. Bret, what do you have for us next week?
Everybody thinking we're gonna listen to They Might Be Giants. No, I'm gonna ask everybody to do something. I'm gonna ask people to dare to be stupid. The third album by Weird Al Yankovic, that was produced by the guy who wrote Hang On Sloopy. So it's going to be a good time.
Yes. Yes. But don't let go. It's fantastic stuff. You can, of course, find it on our Spotify playlist. Check it out. That is next week, and this is this week. You can, of course, find us all over the internet. David is at Please Call Me DJM. Brett is at HibbityBibberd, HIBBITYBIBBRD. Drew is at XJuicer4X. I'm at PD Rave. The show is 4 Record Breakers. That's the number 4 Record Breakers. RecordBreakersPodcast.com. RecordBreakersPodcast@gmail.com. Rebelly.net for this and other shows. You can find us everywhere you find podcasts. iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play. Subscribe, like, share, put some reviews on there. Give us some feedback on our website or YouTube page. Tweet at us what you think of the album, what you think of Nile, what do you think of any of the albums. Go on with us on this fun journey as we discover music. Kind of open up our horizons. But do all the things. Until next time, hasta los huevos.
Grunt, grunt, grunt.
Grunt.
La 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 la.
Rock and roll, how'd you go?
Diamond Club hopes you have enjoyed this program.